Welcome to the tool overview for rest and work, tool number 19 from the RiverTree Discipleship Toolkit. Now, this tool is designed to teach us about the rhythm of rest and work. A fruitful and thriving life draws from a rhythm of rest and work, with our deepest sense of identity and calling and direction emerging when we work out of our rest. So you'll see here a continuum as we look at the picture of this tool. You have rest here and work here, and there's a pendulum here that swings from one end to the other. When we reflect on the way that we were made based on the Genesis accounts, we see that humanity was created on the sixth day and entered immediately into rest. They were designed to join God in His work of ruling over all of creation, and yet when God creates humanity, the first day that they experience is rest. Now, it's been a long practice tradition that Sabbath keeping or rest is actually something that's designed by God for us to spring us forward into our work. That our fruitfulness in calling, in our deep rootedness and understanding our identity, all of these things are things that are found best as we practice a rhythm not where we work hard until we collapse and then rest, but actually moves the other way, that we intentionally rest, defining ourselves not by what we do, but by who God has made us to be. And in that rest, that pendulum actually swings forward into our most fruitful and faithful life. And so this tool is designed for us to have a conversation about that, about what it means for us to not be defined by our work, but be defined by who we are, who God has made us to be, and how rest and that abiding relationship with God can actually redefine us and focus us so that our lives can become more fruitful. Now, you'll see here this reference to John 15. That's because these four areas here are points that we derive from this passage where Jesus talks about the relationship that His people have to Him being like a vine and its branches, that branches draw their very life from God. And so the fruitfulness of a vine actually stems from its connection, its deep abiding restedness in the life of the vine, that everything the branch needs to become fruitful and to grow, it finds through this vital connection. And so we want to talk about these four things as areas where, as the pendulum swings from rest into work, we actually can intentionally have conversations about what it means to be fruitful. So this abiding part, this is your rest. This is being in the Father's presence. This is ceasing from your work and being defined by who you are and not just what you do. This is a tension point, but this is where the practice of rest in our lives becomes absolutely critical. Because abiding is the place where we find strength, we find focus, we find fuel for the rest of our life. Now, pruning, this is a conversation here where Jesus says that the people who are bearing fruit, the Father prunes so that they can bear even more fruit. Pruning is the cutting back of things so that more growth can happen. And so we want to talk about this as far as the way that we use our time, our energy, our resources, how we can kind of cut back and restrict our lives in some ways for the sake of becoming growing and fruitful in those areas in the long term. And so Sabbath and rest is actually a pruning practice. It is one where we are cutting back from our productivity, so to speak, actually for the sake of becoming more faithful and more fruitful in the long run. Here we see growth. Growth is not the end of itself, but it's a part of being healthy. And so the goal of abiding is it's going to result in growth, but the ultimate act in all of these things is to turn into fruitfulness, which is the work and the kind of the fruit, the production that comes from our life, that springs from the life of Christ in us as it does its full work. And so just to talk about the mirror side of this, how do we use this tool to reflect on our own lives? So this tool is designed to help you look at a rhythm of rest and work in your life. For many people in our culture, a rest is completely lacking. Like it's just work. And you'll see that you can get momentum only from rest to swing back into this. If you keep trying to hold things here, it eventually is just going to collapse. And so by keeping a regular rhythm of swinging back from rest into work, and back into rest, we'll see that the strength of our growth, of our fruitfulness in the world, actually becomes exponentially more powerful. So we want to talk about that and the kind of the rhythms of our own lives to see where we feel exhausted or burnt out or empty, and see how those things can kind of be remedied by pulling the pendulum back and spending some time in our life intentionally abiding in Christ and cutting back our lives for the sake of growth and fruitfulness. So some questions to think about. Let's start up with work, because most of us can identify here. So what is your work? This could be your vocation. This could be how you understand your calling or your purpose. What do you feel like you're called or made to do? Your work is inherently enveloped into the work of God in this world. That there's a mission that is apart, since you are a sent person, and everything that you do that as someone who God has commissioned and sent into the world to join Him in His work. So to start off, you got to ask this question: what is my work? What am I to be about in this world? On the other side, let's talk about rest. What does rest look like in your life? What do you do to rest? When do you rest? What do you stop or what do you cease from doing in order to rest? A huge part of Sabbath keeping in the scriptures was a ceasing. So how do you stop so that you can abide and rest and gain strength in life? How regular is this rhythm? Do you rest from your work, or do you work from your rest? That's an interesting question. How are these two ideas different? Do you rest from your work, or do you work from your rest? See, the idea in this picture is that the rest actually springs forward into work, where most of us keep the weight here and then we just swing this way when we can't go any further. Share some ideas about how you're experiencing these four areas. How are you experiencing your abiding life right now? How are you cutting back and making room in your life for growth? How are you experiencing growth? What is the fruit of that growth? What evidence is your life bearing that the work of the Spirit is happening in you? And then to think about this tool and to basically ask this question: how does this speak to where I am? And what is God saying to me? What am I going to do about it? These questions are going to allow you to think through these areas in such a way where this rhythm can come into question, and you can think about how to practically apply some of these areas as a regular part of your life. Now, we stem this whole conversation in the idea that we are created for this kind of rhythm. So this helps us see our world more clearly, because everyone who is created was created with this rhythm in mind, that we should practically live in a rhythm of life that has rest and work built into it. This is why Sabbath keeping was a part of the law. It was building intentionally in an external structure to keep this rhythm of life in play. This is a good reminder that all good growth happens on purpose. It doesn't happen automatically. We have to choose a path to make these rhythms a part of our lives. And so a healthy rhythm of rest and work is an intentional endeavor that should be planned ahead of time and guarded as a sacred thing. So as you're having conversations about this, especially noticing some of the patterns in your own life where maybe there's not pruning, maybe there's not rest, maybe the time to do this seems out of reach. The real question is, how do we build our lives in such a way? What do we say no to so that we can say yes to some of these things more readily in our lives? So in an IDR conversation, so every IDR is eventually going to get into conversations about rhythm, about how we're building in space and structures in our life to intentionally grow and follow after Jesus. And so rest and work are simple terms to talk about this kind of process. And so this is one of a number of tools that you can use in the toolkit to address these things as they come up naturally in conversation, to talk about how we make room to follow Christ. It's really interesting. There was a rabbi who, in hearing of a man who was coming back to faith, back to the Jewish faith, went and had lunch with him and asked him how things were going. And the guy's big question was, where do I start? And the rabbi would say, start with Sabbath. If you can't build your life in such a way where you can structure time and space for the relationship that matters most, the rest of it's just going to fall apart. And so this is a good reminder to us as we kind of build these things out, to think through this as a rhythm conversation. A couple of flags that I would say that you should look for as a great place to bring this tool into conversation. One, if there's burnout or someone who's frustrated or feels like they have an empty tank, take note of conversations where people express exhaustion from life, from ministry, from mission, from external things or from internal things. This tool can be a great way to assess where they see someone in this kind of rhythm and to think through practical ways to plan for rest and pruning for the sake of future fruitfulness. Two, if you're in a conversation with someone who's serious about repurposing or retooling their life for growth, this is a great starting place. To start with this idea that we are intrinsically connected to Jesus in a way where his life becomes our life, and that we have to build space in our life to abide, to receive life from God, to not be defined by the doings of our calling or making, but instead to draw deeply from the life of Christ to sustain us and strengthen us and nurture us. This can be a great way to talk about that practically. Think about this as far as Go community life, that a Go community itself as a group should have a rhythm of rest and work, where you are taking time to rest and not just do, but to take time to receive life from Christ and to practice this kind of rhythm together. And lastly, take notice when you're having conversations where growth seems to be, or fruit seems to be, impossible. Chances are many of the people in our conversations live on this side of things, where they're pursuing fruitfulness, they're pursuing growth, but they keep wondering why they can't get momentum into this direction. Well, the secret here is in making room through cutting things back and then making the time to just rest in who God has made us to be. From that, all of the energy will swing forward into our work as we understand and become focused